Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our event today. My name is John Amendaris, and I serve as the Vice Provost of Institutional Diversity and Inclusion here at Northeastern University. My childhood was a perpetual adventure lived out in the story of many comic books that I read. I was sharing with our guests that on a trip home this holiday break, in one of the rooms in my mom's house are over 10,000 comic books from my childhood, still there, waiting for my sons and others to go through. I used to look forward to the weekend trips to the local comic store and Monday school discussions of the adventures and perils faced by my imaginary heroes. I spent many a moment imagining I could leap over buildings in a single bound, or that I too could be described as amazing, incredible, and fantastic, and not just hear that from my mother. It wasn't until I got older that I realized that the characters of my childhood fantasies bore little resemblance to me. And while a lot has changed through time since my childhood, a lot has not. But fortunately, there are many whose work and commitment to shifting the narratives in comics and in our culture make it possible for my 4-year-old twins to someday see themselves in any space created by their own fantastic imaginations. So we are thrilled today to bring together many of the visionaries who are working to create change in our society. And it is my pleasure to welcome them here and you all to this event, sponsored by our office, the Office of Institutional Diversity and Inclusion, the Center for the Arts, Northeastern Crossing, Gallery 360, and with partners including the Asian American Center, University Bookstore, Boston Comics Roundtable, the Curry Student Center, Marketing and Communications Office, the College of Social Science and Humanities, and the College of Arts, Media, and Design. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bree Edwards, the Director of the Center for the Arts, who will introduce our first panelist.
Thank you, and good morning. I think they're blowing up balloons somewhere. I hear that. As John said, my name is Bree Edwards, and I'm the Director of the Center for the Arts here at Northeastern. And I'm curious if this is the first time for anyone in the Northeastern Student Center. Is this your first? Hey, great. This is wonderful. Welcome. It's great to see you here, and good morning. I will be the MC for the day, so my job is to keep us on schedule, even though we're starting a little bit late, and to also make sure that there's a conversation, a Q&A that happens after each of the panels. Hopefully you grabbed a program when you came in the door. If you didn't, Joe is by the door, and he can give you one. The reason I mention this is because it also it has the schedule for the day, but it also has biographies for each of our presenters in it. So please grab one. We will also be live streaming today. So if you're on social media and people can't be here, remind them that they can tune in and join you. We have different people coming in for different sessions based on teaching and classes. As you probably see, we will begin this morning with Why Comics, Drawing the World You Want to See, featuring Marjorie Liu, Keith Chow, and Stacey Robinson, and John Jennings will moderate this. We'll move into a short Q&A following that, and then we will move into our second panel of the day, Local Vibes, featuring Whit Taylor and Barrington Edwards, moderated by Tony Davis. We will then take a break for lunch, and please stay with us because we will provide you with lunch. And during that time, you'll have the opportunity to shop from the local booksellers who will be here, or go downstairs to Gallery 360 and see the exhibition, Visible Noise, The Art of John Jennings. We will reconvene after lunch, or talk to your neighbors during lunch. We'll reconvene after lunch for Afrofuturism and the Black Imagination. And we will conclude the day with some comments from Stacey Robinson and a reception at Gallery 360. We are honored to have an inspirational group of 11 presenters here with us today. Today's presenters are comprised of artists, writers, scholars, community organizers, entrepreneurs, and public intellectuals. Each are known for pushing the limits of comics and radically reimagining narratives, as John said. Several of today's presenters are creating complex characters whose identities have been largely underrepresented or invisible in mainstream comics, and doing so with complex and righteous storylines, which include characters of color, LGBT characters, women, and more. I would like to acknowledge and thank my collaborators and colleagues here at Northeastern, Jamie Bergeron, who curated today's symposium, and Bruce Ployer, who, working with John Jennings, curated the exhibition in Gallery 360. and Thomas Van Adder, who made all the pieces come together. I would also like to personally thank each of the presenters, many of who traveled, for being here with us today, and thank each of you who are here. And speaking of artists who are change agents, I would like to introduce John Jennings, whose work inspired today's gathering, whose creative ecosystem brought many of us together in this room, and whose organizing efforts building community and platforms across the country. His art celebrates the importance of Black images and radicalizes the notion of the Black subject. It is my true honor to introduce John Jennings. Thank you.
Good morning. Wow, it's weird to hear stuff about yourself, you know? So thank you for coming. So why comics? I wanted to thank Jamie and also Bree, thank you, and Bruce for the wonderful job on the show. And it's quite an honor to be here on campus. Thank you so much for having us. So I want to do a few things before we introduce our panel, supposed to like talk about things, right? So why comics? I love the fact that the first thing you see with the spelling, this particular spelling of comics, is C-O-M-I-X, which is the underground spelling of comics, which is the kind of radical spelling of comics, which is, watch what I'm going to do here, the co-mixing of images and text. See what happened there? All right. That's one of the things I love about comics, right, is the fact that they are a hybridized form, right? And so they're really, really awesome for teaching multimodality, excuse me, in medium, as far as like how we actually read images and text together. They're really wonderful for that. The other idea is that I love the fact that comics, because they're not really taken quote unquote seriously in our country still to a certain degree, they can be really subversive. They can talk about some symbolic things, or they can talk about things in a surrealistic manner that a lot of times you really can't say with regular words or other types of media, right? So that's really a wonderful piece about it. For me, my journey into the comics arena or just living the comics piece was just growing up as a kid in Mississippi, off in the cut, so to speak, in the sticks in Mississippi, small town called Flora, Mississippi, where there wasn't a lot of access to a lot of things. But my mother was a literature major at Alcorn State University. And so she had a lot of books laying around, including books on mythology. Fell in love with like Greek mythology and Norse mythology, particularly Norse mythology, Egyptian mythology. And then she messed around and bought me my first comic book, and it was a rap, right? She brought me the Mighty Thor, and of course immediately I made the connection between the Mighty Thor and the actual Thor, right? You know, and I was like, oh my God, this is the, and then she just started like this really radicalized addiction to like images. So anything that looked like a comic book, anything that had a cape on it, you know, I would want to read, you know. And it's also I started drawing, including on the backs of her Otis Redding albums too, which was unfortunate, though I love Otis, and now I understand how egregious that was. Anyway, so one of the things that started out with my love for this idea of diversity, quote unquote diversity in comics. Anybody familiar with the Masters of American Comics show that came out in like 2005? Hammer Art Museum? No? Show of hands? Nope. I see heads not. Okay, so one person. One person? Really? Okay. Two people? All right. So it was like, it was a show that came out of LA. 15 of the greatest comic book cartoonists, illustrators to ever touch the quill pen. 15 of them, right? And the first thing that you notice about these 15 people that are masters of a particular medium is they were all dudes. It's the first thing you notice, all men. Men that I totally love, like Will Eisner, Jack Kirby, Gary Panter, oh my God. I think, what's his name? Chris Ware was in the show. There's people who I really admire. But I also admire Tarp Mills, and I also admire Colleen Doran as well, you know, quite a bit actually. And I was like, so how do they become masters of American comics, right? Also, too, there was a huge, my God, how do you have a show on like Masters of American Comics without Los Brothers Hernandez, right, for Love and Rockets and all the other work that they've done? The only person of color who was in the show was George Harriman, who actually later on we found it was passing for white. He actually was a man of color from Louisiana, and just kind of passing as Greek, I think, you know, but he used to do Crazy Cat back in the 1920s, so they kind of like accidentally, to a certain degree, put someone of color in the show. So my friend Damian Duffy, who unfortunately couldn't be here, we were at the University of Illinois, and we wanted to do a show that was kind of an answer to this show. So not only did we think the show wasn't diverse as far as like who was doing comics, but the types of comics that were happening, because diversity writ large is dealing with other aspects of not just who's doing the comics, right? So we wanted to do gallery comics. We wanted to do comics about the various social issues. Tack was actually in that show. Thanks, Tack is here. And so it was a really awesome opportunity. And we did the show at University of Illinois, and we went in for this pitch to U of I with all these like charts, and we had copies of like all of Scott McCloud's books and all the whole thing. And we're going to do this hard pitch. And then 14 minutes later, they were like, yes, we're going to do it. And we're like, still like, wait, what? We're going to do what? You know, and so, okay. And then we're high-fiving on the elevator, realizing that we've never curated a show before. So that was, that was like, oh yeah, that was pretty funny. So we actually did a test show. And then we ended up doing this book, which is now out of print, but it's called Black Comics, African American Independent Comics, Art, and Culture. And to a certain degree, what the book did was it kind of solidified this kind of communal artifice to a certain degree. I mean, there were a lot of disparate practices in the book, but what I think it did was actually draw this idea of what the particular, what this community was doing. And so now what's happened is that it's kind of spinned off into this kind of burgeoning culture around African American independent comics. And so this weekend, this is the first of like several pieces that are happening this weekend. So after this particular event, we're going to go to the Schomburg, the Schomburg Research Center for Black Culture in Harlem, where we do this event called the Black Comic, the Black Comic Book Festival. And as it turns out, like there's about 4,000 people coming to actually interact with the artists that we're bringing there. And then the next event is the Black Comic Arts Festival, which is in San Francisco, which is probably going to bring in about 3,000 people to celebrate this kind of burgeoning underculture of Black artists who just happen to be making these independent, really wonderful spaces, right? So the idea is to try to create an alternative network, which me and my friend Ronaldo Anderson call the Cosmic Chitlin Circuit. Anybody familiar with chitlins? Okay, all right, so the idea is utilizing that type of like Black innovative technology to a certain degree to connect people. Because if you didn't know anything about the Chitlin Circuit, that was actually how Black music, race music, was disseminated, right? So it's the same kind of idea where we don't necessarily have to deal with the mainstream if we don't want to. We actually create a network of these particular pieces. So this is the third comics event that I've co-founded in the last 4 years. The other one is called SoulCon, which happens at Ohio State University, which is like Black and Latino artists as well. All right, I'm gonna stop talking because I have other things to interject, but I want to bring up our speakers. First of all, we have the amazing Marjorie Liu. Again, you can read the bios. And Keith Chow, Comic Nerds of Color. Let's see. Now, should I sit down or should I be up here talking? All right, cool. I'm gonna sit down. Are you on this panel? Stacey's on this panel? Are you on this panel, Stacey? Okay, Stacey's on this panel.
We're going to talk later, John.
You are on this panel. Okay, that's right. A couple of days ago, I only got like 2 hours of sleep, so I'm still in that. So sorry about that. My bad, man.
You're about to witness the end of Black Kirby.
See what I'm saying? Okay. Why you gotta be like that? All right. So I actually have several questions, of course, and then we're gonna open it up to what I call the potato sack race at the end, because anything can happen in a potato sack race. So that's how it's gonna go. So I have like 3 questions, overall about diversity in comics. Am I projecting? Okay, good. Okay. It's always weird. All right. So first question I had was, what was the initial instant that you realized that you totally love comics? that you totally just love this medium of comics? And conversely, when was the first time that you realized that they didn't necessarily love you back?
Oh gosh. Go. All right. So the first time I realized I really love comics, I really, really loved that animated Fox series, X-Men, that came on in the 90s. I was obsessed with it. It came on. It was like the perfect like soap opera, and I fell in love. But I didn't have access to a comic book store until I went away to college. And so one day I just sort of wandered in, and the owner was this older guy named like Bud, and he left me alone. I wandered and I picked up copies of the X-Men, Punisher, Wonder Woman, Batman, just like a wide selection of comics, not knowing really what I was getting into. And the first comic I read was an issue of X-Men during the Operation Zero Tolerance storyline, and it was the first introduction of Dr. Cecilia Reyes, which, for those of you who don't know, she is like, she was this amazing Puerto Rican mutant, and who I absolutely became obsessed with. And in that issue, she is being introduced to the X-Men for the very first time and is totally, totally in over her head. She just wants to be a doctor, be left alone. She doesn't want to be a mutant. She's like in the closet. And I felt so sort of, I could identify so strongly with her character and, her sense of just like disbelief and, and sort of horror at the world she's found herself in. So really, my first introduction to comics was this woman of color, who was supposed to be what I had not become, which was a doctor. But then very shortly after that, it didn't take long to realize that, okay, well, yeah, I got Cecilia Reyes, but there's not much else out there. There was Jubilee, there was Storm, but it was this wasteland. It was this very, very white wasteland. And at a certain point, you just have to accept it and just go along with it and endure it. And I felt like I'd been doing that for many years, whether it was comics or later on when I started writing romance novels, which is another very, very, very white arm of publishing, in which almost all the writers are white women, and all the stories are about white people falling in love. And so it took me, even though I was aware of it, it took me some time before I could actually give voice to it and acknowledge it in ways that were eventually became very healing to me.
Excuse me, sorry, didn't mean to cough into the mic. I think for me it was the same kind of experience. I'll start by saying as a kid, my favorite superhero was Batman. I even have a Batman wallet, so I keep my nerd on me at all times. But but as a child, like my only exposure to Batman as a kid was the TV show. Like I watched the Adam West TV show, the reruns. I'm not that old. And but as far as comics, like knowing that I loved the comics was actually the G.I. Joe comics. I came to G.I. Joe. Everyone knows G.I. Joe from the action figures and the cartoon, but not as many people will realize that G.I. Joe is also a fantastic Marvel comic book series written by Larry Hama, who incidentally is Asian American. So finding out that he was an Asian American man like later in life. So when I found out, that's how I loved comics, like the art of comics and the way comics told a different story that the cartoons did or the action figures did. But it also, those G.I. Joe comics also taught me that comics didn't love me back, because my favorite character, I don't know how many people are familiar with G.I. Joe, but my favorite character was a guy named Snake Eyes. Anyone know who Snake Eyes is? Show of hands. Yeah, someone's got a Rishikage tattoo on his arm. So Snake Eyes, if you're not familiar, is this ninja commando dressed all in black. He's got like a really cool visor on his head. He's mute, so he can't talk. And then if you look at his file card, the action figures all had these file cards on the back that gave their like histories and everything. Everything's classified. Real name, classified. Birthplace, classified. So you didn't know who this person was. He could have been anybody.
Right.
So in my head, he's a ninja. So like, talk about Asian American representation in comics, yes. And then there was an issue of G.I. Joe where you saw Snake Eyes without his mask on. And he had blonde hair and blue eyes. His face was disfigured, but he had blonde hair and blue eyes. And my world was just crushed. I was like, really? Of all the kids, Snake Eyes? He doesn't talk. He can be anybody. And even then, he had to be a blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy. And I think that is kind of like, that's the germ for where this whole, and if you follow me on the internet, I've been advocating for Marvel to cast an Asian American actor to play Iron Fist.
Yep.
And I think the germ of that idea started when I found out that Snake Eyes was not an Asian person. And that's when I realized that even the characters that I clung to ultimately didn't represent me. And I've even talked to Larry about it. I'm like, what happened, Larry? So it's kind of like one and the same. The comic that I fell in love with is also the comic that didn't love me back.
Oh, that's painful.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about that article too. 'Cause I'm like, I want to see Shang-Chi. I don't want, you know.
Well, we can talk. We can get into that.
Yeah.
I want to see Iron Fist.
We're ready, we're ready.
Let's go.
I'm trying to remember, as the question was asked, I'm thinking, when did I fall in love with comics? My uncle introduced me to comics. I actually, for the first 7 years of my life, I grew up with my great-grandmother, who, and I always tell this story, my earliest memories are of me drawing I would get up in the morning, I would run over to the corner by the window, and there was this radiator with a pen and a pad on there. And she always made sure it was there for me. And every day I would get up and I would go and draw, every single day. I fell in love with animation first, actually. The old Tarzan cartoon, Speed Racer, a lot of the Marvel cartoons, Submariner, Iron Man, Thor, with the really cheesy animation, but I love that stuff. The old Captain America movie from the 70s. I grew up actually in the beginning with that stuff. My uncle introduced me to comics later, and I think I fell in love with the art. Keith Pollard on Thor. He was drawing Thor and Spider-Man at the same time. I was a bad man. I think he was drawing another book. I think there was one time he was drawing 3 comics at the same time. So I think I fell in love with comics a little later than animation. I learned that they did not love me when I hit probably around 12. And I think that happens for a lot of artists who love comics. You start to notice that you're not in the books as the hero. Or being a black person growing up, I'm black, right? I'm noticing, I'm like, wow, every black person in the book is a criminal. That's not me, that's not my friends. Why are his lips so big? Like, I got some big lips, but these are some big lips. Why do he look like this, right? So these caricatures of black depictions became, to a sense, my enemy, right? So I learned at around 12 that comics did not necessarily love me, but I was an artist at the same time. So I also had a weapon against that type of caricaturization of myself, or people who look like me, and I started creating my own heroes. So, and with a crew of other people as well, we started creating our own characters. And then things started to change, right? Then things started to really start to develop. And then I actually, around the time of 16, I actually thought this was interesting. I decided I wanted to be a comic book illustrator for real. I was like, this is definitely what I want to do. I'm going to graduate high school in a few years. And it kind of hit me. Now, this is interesting. I thought, I got depressed. Fortunately, I walked into a comic book store, and I remember the guy's name. His name was JC, Earthworld Comics in Albany, New York. He said, Stacy, what's wrong? You're not yourself today. I was like, you know, I want to draw comic books, but there are no black artists in the comic book industry. And he was like, Stacy, what are you talking about? He was like, do you know who Mark Wright is? I was like, yeah, he draws my favorite comic. He draws Iron Man, right? He was like, he's a black artist. I was like, wait, what? My world changed from that moment. I automatically assumed there were no black artists in the industry because I didn't see their pictures in the back with the other pictures. Sometimes they would showcase artists. I didn't see Mark Bright's picture. So I assumed everybody was white like the other artists I had been seeing, right? So saying all that to say, I fell in love and out of love throughout the various years. But yeah, I think that answers the question. That was kind of a long answer.
No, that was great. We love, this is a university, we love long answers. So I'm thinking about this idea of diversity on multiple levels, right? So one, you have like who's making comics. The other thing is like who the comics are depicting, right? But then you also have like genre diversity, right? Because still, I think in this country, we conflate superheroes with comics still. And the movies aren't helping that. Some of those are awesome, by the way. Can't wait to see the Black Panther movie. So who do you think is getting it right now? Like who are some of the people besides obviously you all? Who are some of the people? What are some of the things that you're seeing in the industry in media culture that's getting these representations right and that you want to see more of? Is that a hard question?
It is a hard question.
That's what
It
I do,
actually
man.
is.
Especially because you excluded these guys, right? So it's,
Oh no. I mean, if you want to
No.
give props to each other, I guess that's okay.
This is a hard question because the struggle for me for the last, as long as I can remember, is the struggle has been that I don't often find books and creators that do it right, mostly because we don't have that structural diversity that we need. So even if we have, like the optics of diversity, even if we have like, a handful of black characters and a handful of Asian characters and Latino here and there, the people who are writing them and drawing them are often white. And it really does change the tone of the story, especially, and I need to include women as well, when stories are being told through a white male gaze. And so now I'm beginning to see, especially in indie comics, I'm beginning to see more women writing. I'm beginning to see more people of color. And so things are beginning to shift. So we get books by, for example, like Greg Pak, Gene Young, and I can say, okay, you know what? I feel like they're telling stories that I feel safe with, that they're getting it right, and they're telling really interesting, diverse stories. That encompass a broad range of experiences, not just sort of the stereotypical, superhero story. But it's been like it's been a drought. I need to think about this a little bit more. I mean, yeah.
well, I mean, I definitely want to follow up on Marjorie's point about like indie comics and especially like Image. I think I have to give props to Image for publishing Monstrous, which is Marjorie's book. Also, another friend of mine named John Sway had a book called Run, Love, Kill that came out
love
last
that
year,
book.
which is an awesome
Yeah.
book that features a
good book.
a woman of color as the protagonist. And so like, and the thing about Image, if you're not familiar with the industry, is they allow the creators to maintain the rights to their own creations, whereas when you work for DC or Marvel, I think part of the reason you don't see a lot of diversity in DC and Marvel is that DC and Marvel will own the character that you create, even if you create a character of color, right? So it's like, DC and Marvel aren't superheroes, they're intellectual property, right? They're research and development for Warner Brothers and Disney. So there's a lot less room to kind of do that. Though even Marjorie and Greg have made strides, even within the constraints of mainstream superhero comics, to create characters that better represent what the world looks like and not just like barrel-chested white dudes. So I mean, I want to give props to Image for that. And I think indie comics is also a place where, the internet, I won't even say indie comics, I'll say the internet, right, is where you find that diversity. You find that diversity in Tumblr, and you find that diversity on Twitter. And like, I think the internet has broken down the barriers of entry into comics. Kickstarter has broken down the barriers of entry into comics so that people of color, women, gay and trans artists can tell their stories because they don't have to go through the gatekeeper of publisher X or Y.
Who is getting it right? There are countless lists of people who are getting it wrong. It's really, I'm really hard pressed.
That would be easy.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Easy
You should have
question.
asked that question.
I was looking late.
I'm really hard pressed to come up with a list of people who are doing it right. I have to be honest, and yes, I'm biased. I have to say that John and I's publisher, Rosarium, is a really good example. Publisher Bill Campbell. Rosarium Publishing is actually getting it right. It's a group of diverse creators who are creating their own materials. They're creating the worlds that they want to see. I want to see more of that, actually. I think in looking at people who are getting it right, I have to, once again, I have to look at the internet, right? I have to look at how that barrier actually has been broken down. So when you're talking about diversity or the lack of diversity in comics, for example, right? You can actually, I will say this, I will gauge and say that diversity in comics is the conversation is taking place because of the internet. Fans are arguing on Facebook, right? Fans are on Marvel's page, DC's page, criticizing the movies. You have articles by fans, right, who are challenging, right, Iron Fist ethnicity, right? And we don't necessarily have to agree, but we're having the conversation. Mm-hmm. So I think in talking about getting it right, it is actually taking place outside of the circle.
That's right.
The outside is getting it right, but we're affecting the circle, right? We buy, we support. And we can love Daredevil and still challenge, our issues with those things, right? So I think I would argue that the fans are actually not, well, I could argue that as well, so, but once again, that's where the power lies, and that's where the true conversation is taking place. So I would argue that's where it's actually, I think that's who's actually getting it right.
Thank you. It was awesome. So basically, this idea of community is something I've really been fascinated by, obviously. Everyone familiar with Theaster Gates' work? Okay, so Theaster Gates is using his training as an MFA, right, to create community, right? And I'm very inspired by that idea where, like you're saying, Stacey, that these spaces are happening outside of the mainstream, and also creating like these networks, what have you. I don't want to go into too much detail about these things, but I want to actually hear about the projects you're working on. I want to know about what you're working on right now and what the next steps for the projects you're doing right now. And then I'm going to open it up to the potato sack race.
Well, I want to jump on that thing about community, because one of the things, and I think both Stacey and John's point, and this ties into your question about projects, because I think the one thing that I'm currently kind of like pushing forward is, I have a website called thenerdofcolor.org, which is it's just a space where fans do write these critiques about the comics industry and film and television, and advocate for more diversity and representation in those media. But it's also a part of a community on the internet of other similar websites. So I just want to give a shout out to some of those websites and podcasts, like Black Girl Nerds, run by Jamie Broadnax. Yep. Black Nerd Problems, run by William Evans out in Ohio. Like these are the types of communities that Stacey's talking about, that go on Twitter, go on Tumblr, go on Facebook, have their own websites, have podcasts. Geek Soul Brothers, another one. That
Fan
Bros Network. This is the community that I feel like I'm a part of, being with the Nerds of Color, and bringing these communities together to talk about, because you're right, we're also the consumers of this this media, and that eventually, not soon, but eventually, the publishers and the studios have to listen to us, because we're the ones with the we have the power of the wallet, as they say. So I just want to give a shout out to those other people in the community that's out there like pushing for that
getting
change.
it right.
Yeah, that's totally true. I mean, I'm sorry.
Oh, well, I was just going to say that in addition to the importance of these communities being driving forces and being, voices that need to be heard, I can tell you that growing up as this mixed race girl, I felt very, very alone. And even though I had other mixed race friends, we didn't have the vocabulary. We weren't permitted to talk about race. We weren't permitted to talk about the isolation that we might feel and the loneliness we felt and the lack of understanding of what it meant to be mixed race or a person of color, sort of straddling these two sides. And that was back in the 80s, and things haven't really changed that much. But the one thing we do have now are communities online we can reach out and find others in ways that we couldn't before. And that provides a level of comfort, but also a space to actually talk about these things that I certainly didn't have growing up. And so if as a young person of color, you hunger, you feel alone, if you search, you can find sort of, fellow voyagers in ways that wasn't always the case. And I think that hopefully is beginning to translate into, or hopefully it will translate with some very deliberate choices and, communities like this who are talking into the popular culture, into the sort of the mainstream in ways that we haven't had before either.
Let's see. Okay, I'm really curious about what the audiences are talking about too. I mean, do you want to talk about the projects you're working on, or do you want to?
I could make it brief.
What'd you say?
I could do that and make it brief.
Okay.
And make it brief. That's what I said. I could do that. I can make it brief. Yeah, I would love to talk about what I'm working on right now. First, I have to shout out Theaster Gates, right? Because if you're familiar with his work, he's built literally building communities. Using art funds to build communal spaces, to build utopias where conversations can take place, where peace can take place. That's what my work is about. Specifically, I like to make work and display it in the gallery, the art galleries. I like to turn the art gallery into a temporary utopian space and invite the people who are typically not invited to the gallery. Right? Black people, right? To have these conversations. So one of my recent shows was called Binary Conscience, right? And that show, it actually brought together the typically uninvited Black and Latino neighboring community in Buffalo together with the usual white patrons who are, in the community as well, to have conversations that are not typically allowed in the gallery space, right? So. And all surrounding the elements of hip hop. So I had a DJ, right? My work was the graffiti on the wall, right? And we had all of these elements, and we brought this community together to talk about social justice issues, right? So I wanted to do that, and I want to continue to do that. And that's what my work is really about thinking about Black spaces that do not exist and conversations that we cannot have outside of intellectual institutions, like schools, galleries, things of that nature. I want to bring that to the community, but I'm still struggling with how to do that. So I like to subvert the gallery system and turn that into my temporary utopia to talk about the things that we cannot typically talk about in other places.
Did you want to talk about the projects?
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Right. So I'm saying all that. I think some of my images, they might be flashing in the background. Okay, so some of my projects, I'm working on a project now called Fear of a Black God, and I'm thinking about my ideas of my religious past. So I have a very religious past. I told you I grew up with my great-grandmother. Initially went to the AME church. Our church was actually part of the Underground Railroad. Lived with my mother, then became a Jehovah's Witness, right? As I was seeking out my own identity, I affiliated with the Nation of Islam for a little bit of time. During the 90s, and this was all during the 90s, when hip-hop was really strong in its beginning roots, it's part of the 90s, a lot of the focus was on the Nation of God, the 5% Nation of Gods and Earths and those teachings. So those influenced me as well. Well, as I grew up and then I decided to become a non-denominational Christian, Black artist, more politically minded, all of these things influenced my work. So now in my Fear of a Black God series, I'm actually putting these ideas into my work to think about, okay, how this person with this religious background, how can this Black artist, make work that I cannot actually show in church? Right? Because we can't talk about Black God in church, right? So I want to make work that actually talks about this and have these conversations with the church. So I'm working on a series now that is actually having this conversation. I will let you know how it goes. Y'all follow me on Facebook and Instagram. You will see the progress of these images, and I will share my experiment with you to see if we can actually have this conversation. So I should be finishing up that series relatively soon. I'm actually finishing about a piece a day. So, yeah.
You want to talk about?
Yeah, so right now I've just been pouring myself into Monstrous, and which is a,
It's amazing.
Well, thank you. But, I wanted to tell a story. I wanted to do several different things. I wanted to tell a story about race. I wanted to tell a story about women. I want to tell a story about the trauma of war. And the thing is, there were certain things I had to deal with, which is that most of the feminist films that we see are still told sort of through the eyes of patriarchy. And so, we'll see a film about, a woman trying to overcome sexism, overthrow the chains of the man, but ultimately the story still ends up being about the man. And then too, everywhere I see in popular culture, I see stories in which, there's like 5 men for every 1 woman. And you would think that a virus came and like killed off every woman, and no one's commented on it. And that always kind of drives me nuts. And so I want to tell a story where it's not commented on, but the reverse is true, where this is a world. It's not even a world. It's just a story in which there are 5 women for every 1 man, and a virus hasn't killed off every man in the world. It's just that this is the way it is. No big deal. And I want to tell a story too where it's all people of color, and where that's not commented on either. It's not some like strange, I don't know. It's just a world where everyone happens to be a person of color, and they almost all happen to be women, and that is just the way it is. And so that was sort of the backdrop, but also again, going back to what I was saying earlier, growing up as this girl of color and not seeing myself reflected, not seeing sort of this multiracial sort of world that I knew existed, but that wasn't in the books that I was reading, wasn't in the films, wasn't in the television shows that I loved. I wanted to tell a story where a girl of color, a person of color, could open up this book and feel safe. They could be challenged by the story. It's not an easy story. It's very dark. It's very grim. But that the representations that they would receive in this book, where they could be safe. Thank you.
Should we open it up for? Or did you want to?
Oh, no, I'm good.
No, you're good? Okay.
So,
All right,
John, I have a mic back here. I'm going to ask people to use the mic because we have
Awesome.
people on the live stream that are watching.
Thank you. That was what I wanted to talk.
As a retired high school teacher, I've struggled with sensitivity for students of color, for girls. I'm a math teacher, for those who come from alternative lifestyles, if you will, whether it be broken families, in and off the street, whatever else. And those students find it very, very hard to open up at all to me, a white male. I'm wondering what your experiences in high school were like and how that affected your development.
I grew up in a very rural, impoverished space, in Mississippi. So even though I was post-civil rights era, post-integration era, the school that I went to was obviously still segregated. So basically, I didn't have that same issue because the schoolhouse that I attended from like the 1st grade all the way to the 12th grade, because it was extremely underfunded, was on 16 section land, which, as you know, was dedicated to making schools. So I didn't actually interact with anyone white outside of my teachers who seemed to dig me, right? But I didn't actually encounter white people until, as far as like students, until a poor white family moved into the space and couldn't go to the preparatory school where all the white kids who owned all the land around us went to. So that was my experience in Mississippi. So yeah, we did. We had some.
Identifying and interacting with your white teacher?
It was great. I thought it was great. I mean, Miss Stribling, that was my first grade teacher. I totally loved her. She was amazing, actually. She was yeah. So I thought it was good. But then at the same time, I wasn't necessarily like politicized in a particular way. And I was surrounded by people of color. And then, of course, my family were very supportive. So that particular disconnect, I don't think necessarily started to happen until I got much older. And I could actually understand a lot of the different racialized dynamics that were happening there. So. Not in high school, yeah. Most of it was black kids, so.
That's an interesting question. I've never had to think about that before, because when I mull over it, many of my classmates were people of color, mixed race kids, but every single teacher I had, I think with the exception of one teacher in the first grade, almost every single teacher I've ever had has been white. And, and the only real authority figure of color that I had was my dad, and I guess my grandparents. But how odd. And, in some ways, it feels like it runs parallel to sort of this wider, the wider problem that we have in this society in which, everywhere we go, all the, the representations of authority that we get, all the representations of, of sort of success, I shouldn't say all, but I'm speaking generalities here, are very much white-centric. Whether we're even in college, my gosh, when I think about it, I think I had one Asian American teacher for my entire college experience. Yeah, and so, again, but this just speaks to the wider problem at hand, where everywhere we go, we don't see ourselves mirrored, and we don't have, affiliations, we don't have spaces where we're being engaged and taught and sort of held by people who look like us. Well, no, as John said, I grew up in a space where it was not politicized, where, again, anyone who brought up, I remember this very clearly, people who would bring up racism were immediately shunned. They were like, oh, this is, and for mixed race kids, we were held up as props. If someone brought up racism, they would say, oh, here's Marjorie, here's all her little friends. This is a post-racial society because, people are having sex and having babies together, and yay. But they would use us, they would use that as a way of just shutting down the conversation. And that really hasn't changed that much. I don't think that's changed at all. And so when you're growing up in an environment like that, unless you are, at a young age, someone's in your ear saying this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, you're just going to accept it, and you're just going to roll around, and you're going to go with the status quo because that's much easier. And I think, again, because this is a country in which race is not discussed, where people are afraid of discussing race because they'll, for whatever reasons, they'll be called, racist, they're going to be called a troublemaker, we have to swallow a lot, or we just pretend it doesn't exist. And that becomes its own pain, and that becomes its own sort of, thing that eats away at you. And it isn't until perhaps you're much later and you become politicized, or you encounter things that make you think about this in different ways, that you can actually stand up and say, oh, you know what, that sucks. That's actually wrong. But when you're a kid, I'm sorry, you're little. And and I didn't have that at home. My dad suffered tremendous racism, but he swallowed it. He endured it. And he's like, and that was the lesson I got too. You just keep on chugging. You do your own thing. You work hard, and eventually those, ignorant people will just fall away. Well, the problem is they don't fall away.
Please.
Yeah, don't.
Not in this space.
Yeah. Safe space.
No, I just want to piggyback too. Like you were talking about college. I went to an HBCU. I went to Jackson State University, so it's like 99.99% black. Where white people, anyone else than black folk, are minorities, right? Mm-hmm. So was my particular experience. So the other thing I wanted to say is I had actually more issues with, we had more issues around like skin differences in Africa, and because that's what starts to happen. That's one of the unfortunate products of internalized racism is that you start to hate each other. So being a light-skinned black kid coming out of Mississippi, you know, there was a lot of issues where I would get into a lot of things around just because I was a lighter complected cat. So
Well, yeah, I mean, if white people disappeared tomorrow, we would still have white supremacy, we would still have racism. If men disappeared tomorrow, we would still have patriarchy, we would still have elements of sexism that would remain.
which Monstrous picks up on very well. So anyway, so. No? Okay.
Another question?
Dietmar had a question.
Hi, I'm Jason. I read a lot of comics and like manga too. You know, I love all those stories. They're very interesting. And I do get very frustrated with the characterizations. I actually get the most frustrated with how women are characterized. And I wonder if you guys think about that when you're writing stories. 'Cause I know there's a lot of boxes that I know there's a lot of boxes that women and people of color are placed in. And my biggest gripe I have with every comic, every manga that I read is that, you know, no matter how strong the female superhero is, she's eventually going to be saved by a male character. It always happens. And I just wonder, do you let those do you push those boxes and kind of challenge them, or do you try and ignore them altogether? What goes into the mind when you're figuring out how you're going to characterize your particular characters? Do you think about these boxes and try and ignore them, or do you challenge them, or do you you know, I don't know if was that clear, or?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, okay, I'll take this one.
Yeah.
Listen, as a woman, I mean, I won't speak for everyone, but let me just say that for me growing up, I cannot escape this world we live in, this world of popular culture, of books, of television, movies, where literally everywhere we go, women are being hacked to death. They are being hypersexualized. And I'm just talking about women, you know, this is just women in general, and we could break it down in, you know, in racial terms too. You know, sort of the way that Asian women are fetishized, and you know, but that's again, we don't have time for that. But and it's really demoralizing. It's actually it really will mess you up. If you don't have, you know, to be surrounded by all these crazy, you know, deforming representations of the gender that you are part of, that you identify with. It's really disturbing that everywhere I go, women, you know, we are the person who dies. We are the person that a mystery is based off of, because our bodies form sort of the groundwork for the male adventure. The male adventure could not exist without, or it should exist, but you know, in so many mediums, the male adventure could not exist. Masculinity has to be propped up upon our bodies and upon our deaths.
Gail Simone coined the term.
Yeah, the women in refrigerators.
Yeah.
How, when you go through comics, how many women are stuffed in refrigerators? They're dead. You know, they're murdered. They're raped. They're brainwashed. You name it, tortured, all to further the male adventure.
Right.
And we see that everywhere. And even, and this is something I was talking about earlier, even when we have quote unquote feminist films. So let's take Ex Machina, which is my favorite film to tear apart. How many of you guys have seen Ex Machina? Right? So it's a film about a female cyborg. And it was lauded as this great work of feminist science fiction. Well, okay, so you have this female cyborg. Number one, a man is invited to come and determine whether or not she is human, right? So a man is given the power to determine this cyborg's humanity and whether or not she is a real woman. All right, number one. Number two, you know, well, okay, I might as well get into the racial aspects of this as well. But so you have this female character who, again, in so many other stories, the man is pitted against this female cyborg's sexuality. How sexuality is used to sort of undercut a man's agency and trick him and deceive him. And then you have, let's get into the race aspects of this as well, where you have this Asian woman who serves as a sex slave, who serves as this prop for the, you know, the inventor of these female cyborgs, and she's there to dance and cook for him and kneel and, you know, and sort of be his entertainment. She's not given agency until the white cyborg woman whispers in her ear and says, oh, kill the man. And then finally she has agency, and she does this. And then later on, you know, when this white cyborg woman has, you know, sort of wiled her way, you know, it's the great male fear of, you know, of women using their sexuality to sort of, you know, break them down and tear apart their lives and murder them. So, you know, she's done this, and, but she doesn't have a body yet. And what does she do? But she goes into this chamber of horrors where all these women of color are hanging like puppets, you know, in these closets. And she goes to the Asian woman, she flays her. She skins the Asian woman and puts on the body of this Asian woman. Doesn't take her face. She wants to keep her white face, but she takes the Asian woman's body and skins it. And then she goes out into the world, and suddenly she's human.
It's also the Emma Stone story.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, as you can tell, like, I'm really irate, but that's just one example. That is just one tiny, tiny example of the ways that both gender and race collide in our pop culture, in our mass media, to give us these really deformed and messed up representations of what it means to be a woman and a woman of color in the society.
I'm going to take, Stacy, did you have a comment? Or
Yeah,
no?
real quick about depictions. You know, I want to just mention really quickly about black depictions, right, in films. There was a stereotype that the black person in the movie always died first, right? Once again, talking about, you know, I have to bring it back to the fans and how we challenge this. You know, comedians made it a joke to talk about this on stage, right? Fans talked about this and made it actually popular to talk about this, so much so that I think it actually changed, you know, at some point, some points how depictions of just that one particular thing, where black people don't necessarily die first anymore. You know, they may die before,
Unless it's
right. They might die third, right?
Unless it's The Walking Dead.
Right. Oh my God.
And they're the only
yeah.
ones who die.
Right. Right. You know, black people don't even fall in love and live forever in the apocalypse, right? You know, so some of these things have been challenged. This is a really good example, I think, of where fans have constantly pressured this thing to talk about this particular thing about black people dying first, right? And where things have changed somewhat, right? I just wanted to bring that up in reference to talking about depictions, because that's kind of the first thing that came to mind. Not to say that it's a justice of any type. I wouldn't necessarily argue that there's equality now, but I will say that, once again, the fans have challenged this and talking about this, and as it's actually affected how movies are being made. Feel free to disagree with me on that, though, please, and we can converse about that.
So we have time for 2 short questions. I have a gentleman here, and I'm going to... Oh, he doesn't have a question. He has a commentary. I just want to make a PSA that we do also have tables that we're going to take a break and let people look at the wares that are here. We have Boston Comics Roundtable and Million Year Picnic that are here. Woo! So we're going to take a short commentary and a short question, and then we're going to have a little break.
I think that the United States is a country of diversity and isolation. And it's kind of intriguing. I'm German, I'm a German citizen, and I don't see my culture represented either. And so the difficulty is, if you think about this audience right now, there's a College of Journalism here, isn't here? There's a College of Communication Design. Where are those people in the audience?
Actually, the co-hosts of this conference are from journalism and communications. Okay.
Let me just say, if I hadn't met Mr. Jennings and I were office mates for 4 years, I would have gotten a very abstract idea about comics that I could have never experienced in the way that I experienced through his commentary on a daily basis. That's all I want to say.
Thanks, Dietmar.
Thank you for that.
Hi, thank you guys for coming today. Do you feel that Hollywood is, for lack of a better term, throwing people a bone by these recent moves to make Nick Fury black in the Avengers? Or all of a sudden last month now Thor is a woman? And there's been through the past 3 years, there's been a movement of doing this. Instead of what you're speaking of, making a platform, you know, they're just throwing people bones, so that way, if it does come up, they could say, hey, look, we had 3 black guys in this movie instead of just 2. Or, you know, we have a heroine here now instead of where we used to have a strong male role model. So we're exempt from anything you guys have to say. I'd just like to get your opinions on that.
Ask that question after the Black Panther movie drops.
I know, right?
Well, you know, I'll take that because I'm one of those folks out there that's constantly asking Hollywood to cast people of color in roles that are traditionally white, and actually get that pushback sometimes from even from folks of color that say, why does it matter, right? Like, why don't you support like indie comics? Why do you have to like change the race of?
Why do you have to talk so much?
Yeah, well, that too. I do talk too much, but I think it's both and, right? Like, I think on the one hand, I get what you're saying. Like, it goes beyond just Hollywood; it's also publishers. It could be conceived as throwing a bone. Like, there was a whole movement in DC Comics like 10 years ago where like all of a sudden Adam was Asian and you know, Batwoman was gay and like so
Blue Beetle
was Latino. So you had like, but again, I think as Marjorie spoke to, those writers were still white. Those writers were still, you know. So I mean, in the sense it can be a bone, but I do think it's also powerful, right? To see these characters look like what the world looks like. So going back to what I was saying earlier. Netflix is about to drop a new television. They've already done Daredevil to great acclaim. They've done Jessica Jones to great acclaim. Next is Luke Cage, which is an African American superhero that's going to be huge when it comes out this year. And then next year they're planning a 4th one called Iron Fist, and Iron Fist is traditionally a white superhero who just happens to be the best kung fu guy in the Marvel.
He's Chuck Norris.
No, he's more Asian than Asian.
Yeah,
he
it's like-
conquered, like,
So yeah, he goes to this mystical Asian land, conquers the dragon, and comes back to fight crime with his mystical glowing
He flew
fists.
the ancient pterodactyl.
Yeah. So I've been pushing for the last year and a half, like because they're doing the show, they've already announced it's happening. They have a producer, cast an Asian American guy to play it, right? Because he's already draped in Orientalism. This could actually be a way not just to throw a bone to us, but like this could be a way to kind of really subvert that stereotype because the Asian martial artist is only a negative stereotype because we've never seen an Asian American character who does martial arts be a complex character, right? Talking about stereotypes, the problem with stereotypes is that these kinds of characters lack nuance, right? And if you add layers to these characters, if you make them complex, they're no longer stereotypes. So the idea that, you know, well, we must keep Danny Rand, who is the Iron Fist, white because if we make him Asian, we're going to play into stereotypes, rings false because there's already going to be a ton of like Asian martial artists on that show who are going to be like the wise old mentor, who are going to be the bad guy, who are going to be the faceless thugs that get their asses kicked by, sorry, can I say ass on campus?
Probably.
Kicked by the white guy, and I don't know how is that considered progress, right? So to take that all back, I think that there is a way to take these kinds of like bones and make them powerful. Because I think, as Marjorie said, for most folk, that's our only exposure to these characters, right? Like watching a cartoon on TV or watching a TV show. Like, you know, millions of people watch these Avengers movies. Hundreds of thousands of people buy the comics. So just seeing, even in Star Wars, seeing a black man on the screen as the hero, seeing a woman as the hero. It would have been nice if Rey was a woman of color, but whatever. That, you know, that's powerful, even if it is these multi-billion-dollar, you know, franchises. To see that representation, I think what happens is it hopefully catches hold, and that's where the structural change comes from, because you need those powerful representations first. But I think it's both ends. You also need to support these original characters and these original stories.
And just to add on to the whole Iron Fist thing, it is as much of a stereotype, if not more, to see a white man who goes to Asia and and conquers Asianness to become the most powerful, martial artist ever. Like, and also, destroys every evil Asian man to take, the pure, put upon Asian woman as his lover. I mean, that is as much of as a trope as anything.
Right.
And I'm really sick of it.
It becomes
Really
cool
sick
enough
of
to hook
it.
up with the sister, Misty Knight, right? Is he still with Misty Knight?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I could talk forever. We have one more. Yeah, because we should talk after. Okay. Douglas.
Oh, yeah, just to kind of piggyback on your point about making those bones powerful, I was just wondering how, I guess, sustainable do you think, like, art from people of color actually is in America from an economic viewpoint? Kind of like Ta-Nehisi Coates was speaking sometime this year, and somebody in the crowd asked him, why do white people read your stuff? And he couldn't answer it. And as a matter of fact, he piggybacked on that and said that there have been people like him before who wrote as well as he did or were as intelligent as he did, didn't see the kind of year he just had, Mm-hmm. And take something like hip-hop. When hip-hop first came out, it was such a big thing that Ronald Reagan wanted NWA to come visit him in the White House because it was such a big deal. But then the music became something that was kind of targeted toward white suburban families because they had the money, because they could actually pay for CDs, they could actually pay to go to concerts. I know a lot of people like to read, but they can't afford to always buy a book or things like that. So from that viewpoint, how sustainable do you think the bones that we're presently receiving actually is moving forward in the future? Personally, I think the internet will help, but I'm just wondering, your thoughts.
Well, that's one of the things I was talking about. Is like there's a sustainable culture that's outside of the mainstream that's happening right now. Like and every time I mention it, like or try to get it covered by mainstream media, even like black agencies like Ebony, magazine, for instance. I wanted to talk about the fact that we're doing a bi-coastal, independent black, convention like this weekend, both of them. I helped found them, and there's a lot of interest in those particular types of spaces. Personally, I don't really care if those particular spaces are viable because I want to create the other ones. I want to create those spaces. I'm going to go see Black Panther. Try and stop me from buying the new Power Man and Iron Fist. We'd have a problem. But if they fail, I'm too busy working on these other spaces. That's the thing. It's like that's good. I'm excited about Ta-Nehisi Coates writing the Black Panther. I hope it's awesome. But that's that's not my focus personally.
Right. Well, go ahead, Steve.
I was going to say, and really quick, in talking about sustainability, right? So one of the things I found interesting about my work is white people collect the hell out of it. Seriously. White people buy my very, very black art. To the point where I've had this debate and argue with myself. People say, well, if you drew white people, you painted white people, white people would buy it. That's not actually true at all. If I were to do what a lot of artists do and draw busty white women, busty blonde white women, for example, I would not sell a thing. But the blacker my stuff is, the more angry it is, the more white people buy it. Now, I can't tell you why that is. I think the way that I articulate myself, the way I articulate myself, the spaces I show in, the conversations I want to have, all add to that, right? Black people buy my stuff too, right? But what I'm saying is that sustainability actually has come from, in a sense, it came from my outside influences because I could not fit inside the circle, the mainstream, right? Saying all that to say, white people are tired of white people too. In all honesty, right? But I have this conversations with my white friends sometimes, and I would tell them, and I would say things about, man, I would be so angry with white people. They would laugh at me. I think they're gonna punch me in the face. They actually say, yeah, we tired of white people too. Like, what I'm saying? White people love Malcolm X and Public Enemy, right? So I'm saying all this to say that the sustainability is actually already there. It's the subculture that actually, in a sense, has fed the mainstream culture, right? So that diversity is actually there. It is taking place. It is the connecting of these people. And I think the internet, once again, is that key, right? Connecting on using this system that has leveled the playing field has actually connected communities, or not holistically. I'm just saying that the sustainability potential is actually there, right? And connecting these diverse communities that were not connected before, right?
And can I add too? I think the other thing it's about rethinking what these kind of like race swaps mean, right? Because you know, you can think of it as just kind of like, you know, they're just throwing you a bone, like you said. Or you can think about it as we're redefining the default, and the default is not whiteness, right? Because I think that's the main thing, because, you know, when people say, like, why are you changing Nick Fury? Why are you making him black? Why are you making this guy Asian? Why are you doing all this stuff? It's because the idea, it's a false idea, I think, that only, like, people can't identify with those characters. They can only identify with Superman and Batman, which doesn't make sense because he's an alien, he's a multi-billionaire, whatever. But like, because there was this New York Times article that was recently published, an editorial by an Asian man who said, the gist of the article is the Asian superhero is a contradiction because, you know, changing Captain America, making him black, making Thor a woman, they lose their universality because universal equals white. And I think that's the problem. And what we're saying with your work, with Secret Identities, which is the Asian American superhero anthology that I edited, is that whiteness is not the default for superhero comics, for stories in general. And that, you know, it propagates this false narrative that only, you know, people can only identify with white characters, and they can project themselves on the white characters, but they can't project themselves on characters of color. And my thing is, that's not true, because to see yourself in someone who doesn't look like you isn't that difficult, because we've all been doing it our whole lives, right? We've had no choice.
Right.
So for white people to say, like, you know, like you were saying, white people can identify with an African-American character. They can identify with an Asian-American character, because it's about the character and their stories.
Right. I was going to say, my favorite character is Spider-Man.
Mine is Daredevil.
Yeah.
Batman.
Right. You see what I'm saying? So, you know, I think Marvel, you know, in that sense has gotten it right. You know, where I would challenge anybody to say, any Spider-Man fans in here, anybody who's ever read Spider-Man, you've never, ever read a story about Spider-Man. Never. Not one time in hundreds of issues. You've read a story about Peter Parker grappling with his great power comes great responsibility, being Spider-Man. He has to save Aunt May, pay the rent, you know, maintain his relationship with his supermodel girlfriend, you know, make it through school, right? While Dr. Octopus and the Vulture are attacking New York City. You know what I'm saying? I mean, in a sense, it's a very universal story, right? And I think, once again, this is an example. If you just write a good story, right, you can connect with your audience. It can be, you can have dope white characters. You do have dope white characters, right? You can have really dope black characters or Latino characters or Asian characters. Humanize them. Make them realistic, right? And that is that way of building that sustainability. That is that way of connecting the audience, connecting the communities, and not throwing bones.
But I think what you were saying earlier about the default is really, really important, because again, I mean, I'm sounding like a broken record, but in every across the board in popular culture, books, film, television, the default is whiteness. We hear directors, we hear Ridley Scott, like just saying,
Look at Gods of Egypt.
Egypt.
Like I couldn't cast any people of color because I wanted this to be a universal story.
Like what? Yeah.
And it's this idea that we don't exist.
Right.
We don't exist.
Symbolic annihilation.
Exactly. It is symbolic annihilation. We don't exist. We don't exist in the imagination. Our internal states, you know, there is no universal story that could possibly include people of color, because we are not. Go ahead.
I mean, no, it's just that you brought up Spider-Man. Everything that you mentioned about Spider-Man, all of his background and everything, nothing about that equates to whiteness. In fact, if you look at the fundamentals of Spider-Man's story, he's this high school kid who's a science nerd, loves photography, takes care of his elderly Aunt May, who lives in Queens. Like, do you know the demographics of Queens?
Yeah,
like,
right?
have you ever been to
Shit,
Flushing?
that's my homies.
You know what I mean? Like, there's a greater chance Peter Parker is probably Peter Park.
Right.
Or
Exactly.
a black, or a Latino. Like,
Right,
there's
right.
a larger probability that he's not a white dude.
Right.
You know what I mean? But the story shouldn't change if you made an Asian guy Peter Parker.
And that's
you made
the
a black man
beauty
Peter Parker.
of
That's the beauty
Character
of the
like
story.
Miles Morales, right?
Yeah.
Right,
Well,
exactly.
exactly. And the thing is, you know, to get back to the question of sustainability, whatever. I mean, I just tell the stories that I want to tell. And right now, what is burning through me is the desire to tell stories that alter the default, that show, you know, for some young girl of color who wants to be a creator, and maybe she'll read Monstrous, and she'll be like, yeah, you know, here's like a Chinese American woman, here, you know, with a Japanese artist, a Japanese, you know, woman artist, and here are a bunch of people of color, and this is my reality, and I can do this. And the thing is, you know, white people love to consume us. Like, our bodies are up for consumption, you know, and I mean, it's no surprise to me that, you know, hip hop is, you know, suddenly like, you know, both, yeah, sure, they want the money, but it's a whole Rachel Dolezal, like, syndrome, where, you know, we're there to be consumed, whether it's our music, whether it's our culture, you know, whether it's, I mean, yeah, I won't get into how many times growing up I would see white women in dreads celebrating Kwanzaa, like in Seattle, and like that was
Chopsticks in their hair.
chopsticks in their hair, like the whole, you know. Anyway, this could go on forever. This conversation just drives me up the wall.
Yeah, see, potato sack. Is that it? Are we done? That was fine, okay.
So I wanted to thank
Do we have
this
one?
amazing group. I'm going to keep us to the schedule because we're going to reconvene in about 5 minutes. I don't want anyone in this room to leave unless you absolutely have to. But please grab some coffee, water, use the restroom. We will reconvene for Local Vibes, Independent Artists Speak with Whit Taylor, Barrington Edwards, and Tony Davis. And I just thought we should thank this amazing group of presenters.